this permit can be, anybody that feels that there is an impact happening during the process of this permit can come to the board, and the board can consider cancellation at any time. As such, with the CEQA exemption, it's upon the world to say that there's an impact. When we use the categorical exemption, we're saying we don't see one, and the responsibility is on someone else to say there is something that's happening, and then we look at that, and that may or may not trigger further CEQA review. And so, backtracking a little more, the package did not include page 4 of the staff report. The board did receive that this morning, and what that did was go through what the situations that could occur to cause more CEQA analysis, and that's right here. If anybody wants a copy, it should be in front of you. If you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them. And so that completes the staff report. I can go over the conditions. They're in your packet. They're very similar to the ones that were before the board 3 years ago. It's the board's pleasure if you want me to go through the 13 conditions that are in your packet in the proposed resolution.
I have a question, Marty. With the new state groundwater laws, which is passed, I mean, what priority basin is that up there? I'm assuming there's probably no priority just because it drinks from the valley.
Well, we're in the process of finding that out. There is not an official map telling us what that basin is pursuant to that new law. They're supposed to publication, I think, April?
No, January 31 of this coming year.
So that map's coming out, but it's not out yet.
Based on the early news releases and stuff, the only basins in Lassen County that would be given a high priority is the Pit River drainage, which is part of north is this.
Big Valley.
Big Valley. And then also the portion over here in Clear Creek westward, that little part of Lassen County that drains into the Feather River. Other than that, the rest of Lassen County, and I believe this area, is all considered in that low priority category because of the drainage. I mean, everything that's within the Lassen Region Water Basin or Regional Water Authority or the regional board is considered low priority. Everything that's in the Central Valley region is considered high priority.
The reason I bring that up is we kind of forget about that little corner of Lassen County up there that's in that.
But that's
Surprise Valley.
But Surprise Valley is part of the Lassen region.
Right.
So,
And Mr. Anderson and Mr. Egan and I had occasion to go to the location a month and a half ago. The location is interesting, part of the Surprise Valley aquifer, Surprise Valley groundwater basin. We looked also, because we were, Mr. Anderson and I were interested in trying to ascertain, what aquifers, what groundwater basins in Lassen County were going to be hit by the new groundwater legislation in response to your question. And specifically recall looking at the one from Surprise Valley, and it is, at least by all indications at this point, the official map has not come out, but it is not only low priority, but it appears to be pretty healthy.
Yeah, that's my understanding, both what you said and Mr. Burns. They always caveat, but we'll see what the map looks like, but that's, by all indications, everything is low, except for the 2 spots that you...
I would be surprised if any of the drainage that is under the jurisdiction of the Lassen Regional Water Control Board would be in a high priority, at least in the North Basin, north of Tahoe for the Lassen Board. I sat on that 2 different times and had several years of experience and quite familiar with the territory. There will be areas in Southern California in the Lassen region that won't be affected by the legislation, but I think this part up here, based on that initial report, is going to be given a low priority.
And just a few more comments. As Mr. Burns said, we had occasion to go to the ranch, and we had gone through this exercise 3 years ago, and staff went to the site. I hadn't, but for me it was really something to see the visual, because it really makes sense when you look at it. This is an operating ranch. The pivot that's shown with the point of use right there, the county line being, I think that road right there, right? Or that line?
State line.
State line.
Yes.
That's
correct.
Where your arrow is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and if you pan out a little bit.
We do
expert in the room.
And you can't really see the topography as well looking straight down, but this is all just basically, that's the end of the valley right there. And so the water really is not, we're talking a distance of, what, 1/8 of a mile over the border, and it's staying right in the basin. And so it's, we all see spooks when we hear exportation. We see bigger spooks when it's going across the state line, but as I said, when we went there, it's just, that's a working ranch. It really makes sense. And when, people started ranching that area below those many years ago, I don't think they saw a bunch of lines everywhere, because you got counties intermingling with state lines and everything else. And I think, you go where the soil is and you go where you can get the water. And to me, this is probably not what this water exportation ordinance is designed to really look at. This is probably, in my mind, a lower level application that probably should be not going through this kind of process, but that's just some personal commentary. But anyway, so staff's in support of this as we were last time it was before you, and I'll answer any questions.
We're on the resolution on page 5, number 9. Talks about roughly 12 hours a day. What was that, 24 hours? It is not anticipated to exceed 169 days per year, nor 12 hours per day.
One would like me to answer that. It's kind of somewhat arbitrary. It was just the numbers we ran to see if it made sense, to see if that volume with that rate kind of matched up in terms of when people would be bumping, how much they would be bumping, and that's just a number it came out to. So it's just a benchmark to say, okay, does this make sense when we look at it closely?
The total volume of water, does that make sense for that?
The total volume for a year, 12 hours a day for 360 days.
If you're setting them up to fill, just, pump 12 hours a day.
This doesn't.
This is not restricting.
This is different from being able.
This is for analysis purposes to just, it's a.
This is a finding, not a condition.
A finding just saying that staff was looking at the rate and the flow rate and the volume and seeing if there was some connection to that. If the volume didn't match the rate, then we would look closer.
But this doesn't require them to only pump 12 hours a day. This is just a finding saying it looks like the right amount for what they're saying they're going to use, what it takes to water that, to irrigate that pivot.
But that
Let me try it.
That's not even accurate, because you exceed it not to exceed 169 days, which is 5.5 months. The irrigation system is going to exceed is going to be 5 to 6 months at 24 hours a day.
If I could try to answer that, the applicants have indicated they're going to use about 504 acre-feet for 129 acres, which seems to make sense. That's somewhere around 40 inches of water. And if you take that 504 acre-feet and divide it by the number of days in the irrigation season, about 169, that would equate to about 12 hours a day. Not saying that each day would be 12 hours, but there would be some days when it's on, some days when it's off.
Yes, that's all correct, but I'm not comfortable with it,
Well, listen, the finding was there to just support what they're saying is true, and it certainly would take it out.
True, I mean, it's 169 days, 12 hours a day, they will use more water. I mean, I sure wouldn't want that in an application of mine.
Well, again, we can
Last
take
year
it
I
out.
started pumping
It's
in
a finding. It's not.
Last year I pumped from February 24th to September 10th. I mean, that's a hell of a lot. 24 hours a day. Then I started them up and they never shut off all summer. I mean, that was an exceptional year. I think the creek was dry and had no surface water, but who knows? I mean, I don't want to restrict into that.
That's fine. That can be removed. It was meant to argue that what they're saying is accurate.
I'm not comfortable with it.
If you're going to have numbers in there, I'd change the numbers, make it like 200 days because, you know, you never know what the season's like, and then I'd say 24 hours a day, so you kind of create some upper caps. Yeah, but I think.
The reason my concern is they're gonna take too much water.
Yeah.
What I would prefer is being silent on the issue, because if we say 169 days, or however many days, times 24 hours a day, that equates to a lot more than the 504 acre feet.
I agree, I would just remove it. I think it's a finding, it's not a condition. It was meant to support and let the board conclude that what they're saying is true. And if that is having the opposite effect,
I guess they're confused.
Well, we can change the wording of it. It says the Board of Supervisors questions the staff's. They make that as a finding.
I would agree. Take it out.
yeah.
I just want to put it in its own volume, I think that would be fun.
Like that, Bob?
So,
So the original one we supported, but how come that one is just not getting renewed? I see this isn't a renewal.
They have a 3-year life cycle. That's the way the code is written. I'm not sure exactly why it's written that way, but to me, it indicates that the board wants to keep looking at these,
If we want to change that, we have to revise the ordinance.
The whole-
I mean,
That's
to
a
me,
county ordinance.
this is a headache for us to have to go back every 3 years.
Agreed, and we can talk about that at a future meeting. Maybe that's something we need to amend.
We've discussed at a staff level the possibility of allowing for some other mechanism, so there's some certainty in going into the future for the plan.
Well, this started out as a trial experience to see how it works. We've already been through one trial, so I think, there were a number of concerns that were raised when this first came up.
Well, like
I
people
think-
that just didn't understand the issue.
Well, and now we have a track record, and they have a track record. We know basically how it works, so I think the fears that were promoted the last time are not as intense today as it was then.
There is an exception in the ordinance. There is an exception in the ordinance that would allow for this kind of application not even to be necessary to be presented here, except the fact there's a parsing between the point of diversion and the point of proposed distribution. That was the only reason that essentially it's here today. And we did look at that.
One way of addressing the ordinance that we've discussed at the staff level would be to change the ordinance to say that if the water is being consumed within a certain distance of the county border, then it would be exempt from the requirement of permit. I might suggest something like a mile.
And within the same base.
And of course, that's a proposed amendment to the ordinance and something we could put on for today.
Well, if we act on this today and keep this in place, we have whatever the time frame this extension would be to review the ordinance, and at some point, if the ordinance changes, it would basically make moot whether or not to bring this back.
That's
because
correct.
it can be done, so.
Morning, the original application, as Supervisor Chapman said, was highly contested. It was approved basically based on the monitoring permit. It allows for 504 acre feet. So how many acre feet has been pumped each year?
Well, I know the applicant is here and she can answer that better than I can. We did the restriction on the flow meter. That was our main tool. We did monitoring, but monitoring really is only effective over a certain temporal aspect. I mean, putting a measure down a hole and saying it's whatever it is, it's meaningless.
Well, how do you measure that if you're allowing the 504 acre feet?
Primarily through the flow meter.
Yeah. So how many acre feet was used?
I would defer to the spouse to answer the question.
So did they do their own monitoring, or do we do it?
Well, we went out there, as I said, we have measured the well, but the primary restriction is the flow meter.
And that the flow meter is also a recording device, correct?
And so I don't know that number, but I think it was under the,
It was under the 304. 504.
they had a different number.
Well, I mean,
Three,
when
it
I
was
went up,
under the 3.
when I went up there, I was under the impression you had a measuring device on the pivot and two of them on the well?
We have 2 different wells, so there's one measuring device on each well,
Okay, that's
and
very-
then there's one on the pivot.
Right,
So we know what's going into Nevada,
right.
and we know what's
Right.
being pumped out of the 2 wells.
And again, their limit was 3-something on that application. This one's-
Three something what
So
the?
300 and some acre feet.
Yeah. That's the-
On
the
the
limit.
original permit, it was 3, but this is
Three-
for 500 acre.
Yes.
Right,
It's 3 CFS and 504 acre feet.
Yeah.
on this one.
What was the last one?
Same. Same.
Yeah.
Now there's
So I guess my point is that if we want to, I mean, the argument is a good, as part of the same ranch, so maybe there doesn't need to be any limits, and we may change it, you know, like you said, if it's within so many feet, but if we're going to have, it's set up to give the every indication that somebody's actually monitoring it. I think that somebody should, you know, be the county somewhat. Is there anybody here from the county that has any documents?
We need to keep, if we're putting this on there, somebody in the county has got to be keeping track of this.
Well, remember, to go back 3 years ago, we were on the edge of becoming the water monitoring entity for Lassen County, which never came to fruition. The state has never relinquished control. So we had, at that time, expected that we would be monitoring. We've gone out there, the information is available, but the state never did give us the authority through that CASGEM project to be the monitoring entity. So I don't know if the state measured it, but as I said, the information is available. We relied on flow meters. They didn't come close.
So,
So does DWR, they keep track of the flow meter?
I don't know if they're going out there or not.
Or they measure-
Their wells that they measure are good enough for them, but not good enough for us.
Are they the ones going out measuring the wells before and after irrigation season?
Yes, but I don't know if these cells are one of their wells.
Actually,
And they measure a lot of wells that, like I say, they measure them, but they're really technically not sufficient wells to be used for data collection.
Yeah, because it was
actually, NRCS did, well, not you, DWR, but now NRCS is taking it over. It's actually federal.
the flood controls that you mentioned, it's fine, it's there. And I was just curious.
Well, those different entities are probably measuring for different reasons and with different authorities. DWR,
my point is that,
yes, we will be monitoring.
Yeah, but does anybody know in the last 3 years, is there any data? I mean, let's just take it out if we're not gonna, if it's just like the
I would
voting thing.
propose to leave it in.
But I'm just saying, then if we leave it in, we need to actually monitor it.
Right.
Because it's like, oh,
You're missing another point too. It's not only good for us, but it's benefit of the property. I mean, I got meters on all mine. There's no law, I have to do there for my own use. And Lonnie may like it, just for her own use, you know what that world's
But why are we, it's like we're putting a limit on here, but nobody checks the limit. So why is the limit on there just to give perception to the people that opposed it? We're actually going to
As
limit
far as
it?
I'm concerned, you don't need to be a limit or a meter or anything.
Then
Well, there
that's my
wasn't-
point. If it needs to be limited, we need to check it. If it doesn't need to be a limit, then take it out.
Well, Matt's pointing out that that wasn't a condition of the first one.
It wasn't.
The monitoring, before and after monitoring wasn't a condition of the first permit.
We had
Yeah, but it's supposed to be limited to 3
extensive
CFS.
And that was dealt with by the flow meter.
But who kept track of the flow meter is part of what Larry's getting at.
No, point
I think
taken. I
Lonnie
mean,
probably knows.
Yeah, hi.
But it's
Yeah.
not, it shouldn't be her responsibility, she
Right.
didn't make the rules.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Lonnie and Estelle. Somebody from the county did come out and look at the flow meters with Joe, our farm supervisor, and I did not write down those exact numbers. And it's got to be here somewhere, but they did come out and look, and they were fine. We're way under the amount. And we did do the static well test also at the end of the season, and that's what's being required in this permit. And the old well, the one we've had for several years now, drawdown was 29 feet, I believe. It might be in the Planning Commission minutes, so if I'm saying something different, let's go with Planning Commission, because I had them written down at that meeting. And then the one at the new well was just 9 feet. And it, within a week, 10 days, was back artesian well. So we did that. And I know that the county looked at the flow meters. They came out that, and I wasn't there that day.
So does the flow meter keep the total gallons?
Yeah, it does the total gallons per minute.
Does it also record acre feet?
I believe it does, or there's a calculation we use to get that. Yeah.
So, some of them are like a speedometer where they show what's flowing through it and it records
Yeah, this is one
the
that-
cumulative total that's flowing through it.
Yeah, it does the cumulative thing.
Okay. So reading could be taken twice a year.
So, but if we're gonna have limitations on it, and I'm not saying there needs to be any, or it doesn't, or does, but I'm just saying if there is, it just seems like, well, not just seems like, it is like total nonsense if we don't have a mechanism in place to do it. So, and if we don't need it, we don't need it. I'm not saying we do need it. I'm just saying, why have it? And then like now, nobody can even say how much water was used. This was 3 years ago.
Well, if that meter is what I believe it is, then we could either do a self-reporting by the distillers of what was consumed, and or we could verify that by
Yeah, it's like hunting season.
All right.
Twice a year.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think you guys are all missing the point. The meter and the limits or the whatever has nothing to do with the county, has nothing to do with the Esteles. It has to do with the public. And in terms of protecting the public's interest, in terms of having, I mean, there's been a legitimate concern about, the exportation of waters in basins throughout the state, and I mean, it's been an age-long battle. Whiskies for drinking, waters for fighting, and I think that the placement of those limits was done to provide the assurances to the public that the true intent of this permit and this practice, is legitimate in terms of satisfying the internal ranching operators of this particular property. That by having those limits and those kind of positions put in there is to preclude the opportunity down the road by future owners or even the current owners of, maybe converting the use of this legitimate operation to something that would be, not legitimate. And one of the ways that you're able to shut that down, if there is indeed at some time in the future, let's say they decide to take, instead of having the 5.4 acre feet or how many of the acre feet and make it 25 acre feet. In terms of, and then using it for some other purpose other than running these pivots. One of the ways you shut down that is because you have these limits in place, so they kind of provide for an internal control. But I think it's designed more to reassure the public, that what they're proposing to do and what we're supporting them doing, is legitimate and the public interest is being served by it. That's the whole pretext. So whether they use the full allocation, if they go over the allocation in a marginal amount, the enforcement is not so, if you use 1 acre feet more than what the limit is, that's go to jail, do not pass go, pay $200 or whatever it is. But I think it's designed to kind of, so to take any references to those limits out, opens the door to enhancing public scrutiny to the detriment of everybody involved. And I don't think we want to do that. I think we want to maintain that. I do agree that we need to take out this 169 days and 12 hours, and now we're starting to get into the micromanaging kind of role, and I don't think that's the intent, and I don't concur with staff in making that particular recommendation, and I think the board's addressed that. But I do feel that these other limits, and based upon what Mrs. Stell has represented, it's obviously not creating them any problem, and having those meters, doing the counting and stuff, allows for any point in time for anybody of legitimate interest to be able to go in and get those numbers and readings, whether it's self-reported or it's inspected by county staff twice a year or once a year or once a month. I mean, that becomes a matter of what we want to do in terms of extracting that information. And I agree with Mr. Pyle. I think from the point of view of the landowner, it gives them critical information they need that is important to their operation. So whether we impose it or not, I think that's something that they're going to probably be interested in having. So I think that part of the provision should remain intact. And it sounds like the limits that have been put in place far exceed what they're using or needing at this point in time. So and if it is, then at some future point, it could always be modified upwards.
Thanks, Warren. Okay, we're gonna go
There's
now.
a head in the audience.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Open the vote.
Yeah.
Is it open for?
Yes. Yeah, I did it.
Hi, I'm Barry Minetti, one of the landowners next to this yard, actually of about 600 acres. And we currently have artesian wells, and of course our concern is if you start pumping out of there, what's it going to do to our artesian wells? I've seen it over and over, you look at the history of this pumping in a basin, and you guys are saying, well, it's going to go back into the same basin, but we want to make sure there's, restrictions that they can't do, like you said, something else with the water down the road. And, you do need to monitor how much they're using. They can't monitor themselves. I mean, they can, but, you're accountable to the public, just like you said. You're going to have to make sure that they're only using the amount that they're supposed to, and it's only being used for agriculture, not for some other use down the road. And I don't know, are you guys done with this topic, or there was one other concern that we had too, is that the current diversion property is zoned for, I believe, ag preserve and something else, upland conservation. Well, I'm not understanding how if it's in preserve that you can take water from it when it's supposed to be, keep it up for agriculture. And there's also, I believe, 1,000 acres that's getting put into the NRCS. USDA's putting in an easement also with those dells. And that's in Bullock County. But how is that going to affect taking water out of there? How's that going to affect that?
You want to answer that?
Which part? The zoning question.
Yeah.
There's nothing consistent about the application with the zoning. The upland conservation is a name that goes with the UC2 zoning district, and there's nothing inconsistent about the exportation of water as long as there's no adverse impact, as that's the theme of all this. And I'm not aware of the NRCS project.
Is there a conservation easement going in?
Yeah, it's already in.
It's already in.
I can explain it if you want to, but it's kind of irrelevant to this because it's
I'm not in a position to comment on it. I'm not aware of it, and I'm not familiar with
10 miles, 6 miles away.
I guess the pertinent question would be, does the easement alter the use of the water or not? Typically, no.
I don't see how it would. I'm totally confused on how it would.
Well, just if you're taking water out of what's supposed to be for these conservation easements and ag preserves, I mean, wouldn't that negatively affect that property to, pump it into the desert?
No, not unless it's an older drought.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be monitored.
Normally, the easements contemplate continuing the existing use of the landowners.
It does a problem with the
And preventing other.
That's what
That's not a good point.
Yeah, I can address it if you put that map up where it is in relation to this and the different, it's totally different. It's a different source of water if you want to.
That's not relevant to what we're doing here with
It's
this.
got nothing to do with the conditions of the permit.
I mean, if that would be between, the people in NRCS or whatever, and the Estelles, if there's any improper use of land that had been granted conservation easements, are really for us.
And if I may, I had occasion-based transmission at the time this issue was presented as well, most recently, not 3 years ago, but most recently. And one point that was made then, and another point, and I don't think, I think it was the other Minetti brother that presented himself.
No, it was
Oh,
me.
my apologies.
It was me.
And the point was made at that hearing, and I think Mr. Anderson made it again today, and that is that the granting of such a permit is not then close the issue for a 3-year period. And I think that's important to know. The groundwater exportation ordinance that the